Hello everybody, it's Mike here. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. Now you may have received this podcast on your podcasting app today and thought, what the hell? Is it Friday already? What a gloriously quick working week that was. Alas, it is still Monday. We're bringing you a little bonus episode this week because, well, it's the month of February, otherwise known as Women in Horror Month. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to spend a bit of time celebrating women in horror. Later on in this episode, I'm going to be joined by friend of the pod, Becky Darke, and we are going to be recommending 10 of our favourite female-directed horror films and where you can find them to stream online right now. But first of all, in the first half of this episode, we are going to be talking about a brand new horror film which I saw at virtual Sundance Film Festival last week. It's directed by none other than friend of the pod, Prano Bailey-Bond, and it's called Censor. For those of you that have listened to the pod since the beginning, you'll know Prano very well. She was here first time on our Ghost series discussing Poltergeist with me. She's also been here this series during our Mind and Body season discussing her favourite movie, Blue Velvet. So I was so excited to finally sit and watch her debut feature film, Censor. Now, Censor is... it's early in the year, I know, but it is so far my favourite horror film of 2021. Just a beautifully smart and chilling psychological horror film about a woman working as a censor during the video nasty movement in the early 80s in Britain. It kind of really pushes all of my buttons, this film, and I had such a great time. So I sat down and chatted to Prano Bailey-Bond about the film and about some of her inspiration. Now, just so you know, this episode will be completely spoiler-free. We will not be bringing you any kind of spoilerific review of Censor, because I know that obviously at this point in time, so few of you will have gotten a chance to see it. So please don't worry about being spoiled. You're about to hear my interview with Prano Bailey-Bond, and we talk about the film very, very briefly, and then talk about other subjects surrounding the film. And then later on in this episode, me and Becky will also briefly discuss our thoughts on Censor, but completely spoiler-free. So I really hope you enjoy this bonus episode. Here is my discussion with the writer and director of Censor, the brilliant Prano Bailey-Bond. Hello, Prano.
Hi, Mike.
This is really exciting. I remember the first time we chatted on the podcast, and I think at that point you were sort of saying, yeah, I'm just like in the early process of writing my first feature and everything. And here you are now at Sundance. How cool is this?
I know. You've been there the whole time, haven't you? No, it's been really, really amazing. Sundance is such an incredible platform, and it's been a nuts weekend.
I bet, I can imagine. So tell us a little bit about Censor. What can people sort of expect from Censor?
Well, it's a psychological horror set during the kind of video nasty era, and it follows a film censor who sees something in a film that harks back to the day that her little sister disappeared. And when she investigates the filmmaker, she goes on a journey that kind of blurs fiction and reality.
So cool. So I remember seeing your short film Nasty, which kind of dealt with sort of similar themes, right? What is it about this particular era, the sort of the video nasties and this sort of time period that sort of really inspires you to make these films?
Well, the way in for me to censor was actually the idea of a film censor, because you're like, oh, that's such a fascinating job. But I kind of quickly landed in the video nasty era because it was just the reaction to these films that I guess this idea that society thought that these films, or the press and the MPs thought that these films were going to turn us all into monsters. And it's happened so much throughout, the ages, like comic books in the 50s, and we've had it with video games. We've got it now with social media, although that's a whole other thing. But I just think it's almost like we're considered to be one step away from, doing something really, really bad. Like, we're going to watch a Lucio Fulci film and then want to go out and take our scissors with us and over people to death. And I guess it was like, what does that say about us as people? Like, that we're so frightened of ourselves. And that was kind of where the idea of Enid came from, that it was like this person who thinks maybe deep down she's a terrible person.
Yeah, and really interesting because, you know, Nasty, I remember focused on, it was a male character really that it was focused on predominantly, wasn't it? What sort of inspired you to focus more on the character of Enid in this particular story?
It actually started as a male censor. Very, very early on. It was like a really silly idea in my head. Often my ideas start with something really silly. But it was, you know, the idea I kind of went in with was very much like, you know, if these violent images are supposed to make us commit violent acts, what is it that protects the film censor from losing control? And I was sort of first drawn to a man because obviously there was a lot of violence towards women and things in these films too. But it really quickly moved to being a woman. And I think it's because I was more interested in what I was talking about before, about the idea of us thinking that we're a bad person. And I think it felt like if I made it a male character, that it would lean more into the sexual violence, which I think is a really interesting space to explore, but wasn't the space that I wanted to explore.
I remember as a horror fan, like, and I'm sure we all go through this, right? Like, you kind of want to track down and check out a lot of these movies that were banned at this time, right? It's almost like a kind of checklist of like things you've got to see. Are you personally just a fan of a lot of these video nasties from this era? Did you kind of rewatch a lot of them while sort of prepping for this film?
Yeah, totally. I am a fan. I'm a massive Argento fan, Lucio Fulci fan, Sam Raimi. You know, I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has to be up there with like one of the best horrors of all time, I think. And these are the films that are kind of remembered and being remade now. But then there's a whole kind of murky, like lower down bunch of films that are just insane, and like Nightmare in a Damaged Brain, which pops up in the title sequence. Like I watched that and I was like, oh my God, you're going, what have I just seen? You know, Basket Case. Like I'm a huge fan, and being able to watch and rewatch all of these films and call it work for this project was pretty cool.
Is there anything about this kind of argument that you agree with or empathise with? Like, do you think that censorship in any form of art should exist?
Well, this is the thing, because when I first started working on the film, like I feel that no, it shouldn't. Like I'm on that side. However, when I saw a Serbian film, I had a really strong reaction to that. And I was like, oh my God, this shouldn't be out there. Like some of the things I'd seen, I remember watching it. I watched the uncut version in a very kind of video nasty way in some ways, because I was working at a pub at the time. And I met this guy who used to bring in uncut versions of films for me in like a plastic bag.
Oh, amazing.
And he'd bought me a Serbian film because it was doing festivals, but it kept being like taken off festivals because it was so problematic. And I watched it with my housemate, and I remember coming out and my other housemates going like, what have you seen? And I was like, I can't talk about it. I didn't want anyone to know. Yeah. I didn't want to say because it felt so wrong, but what I just watched. And then I started going, oh, so if that's where I draw the line, like other people's lines are just, you know, much lower down in terms of the violent spectrum. So I guess I just find it a really interesting conversation. And I definitely wasn't going into making sense of wanting to, you know, tie all this up in a neat little bow. It's really, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there that I think that's layered into the film, that I think about horror and what horror is helpful for, you know, why we want to watch it, why we want to make it, how it creates a kind of safe space for us to be scared and a catharsis for us. But then there's also, I think, setting the film during the 80s does allow you to look at censorship in hindsight. It allows you to look with a different set of goggles on, because we look back now and we're like, wow, what an overreaction. But when you're in that moment, I guess you don't know what the future is going to be. So yeah, it's a whole conversation, I think.
Yeah, it is. And I think, like you say, people sort of draw the lines at different places, don't they? I've seen a Serbian film recently, and we talked about it, about how even like you, like even some of the more sort of hardened horror fans really sort of recoil about that film. And you know, I understand it, but then also I had to tell myself as I was watching it, I was like, this is just a film, right? It is just, as far as I'm aware, no one was actually harmed in making it. It is props, it's actors, it's a script, it's makeup, it's, you know, and so that kind of helps me sort of think, okay, well, that art is allowed to exist then. Weirdly, I had more of a problem with, speaking of video nasties, like Cannibal Holocaust at like the actual animal cruelty, right? And I try and draw the line for myself at being like, I don't really want to see something that has sort of actual harm. But then that's also murky too, right? Because it's like, well, what is harm? Who knows what was done to certain actresses on some of the sets of this film? And again, that's sort of something that you in your film sort of explore as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, because you hear so many stories from that period as well, don't you? And even from more recently, all over the way people are treated on set. And I mean, you know, The Shining is a fascinating example of that. And I've seen footage of Shelley Duvall and Kubrick, and you're kind of going, is he a genius or is he like a torturer, you know? But I completely agree with the Cannibal Holocaust. Like, for me, violence towards animals is the thing that just I you know, like that I find it really difficult to watch. And actually, it was because of that, it was one of the scenes that I showed the actors when we were rehearsing, the actors playing the film censors, because I wanted them to try and understand that these people were going into work and sitting there and they didn't know what they were going to be seeing. And, you know, when I spoke to film censors from the period, I said to them, like, did you ever feel like you were watching a snuff film, or did you ever think you were watching something real? And, you know, there were things like Faces of Death, which obviously did have real footage in it, and something like Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's important to know that context. I think that's what's really interesting about your film, is that it does bring that balance. Like, I don't think you're supposed to look at the character of Enid as some Mary Whitehouse type, are you? That's the thing.
Yeah. No, not at all. I mean, we played with that. Like, that was always a question, was like, how extreme is she? But then it was always about coming back to this idea that Enid, even she says in the film that she's driven to censorship in order to protect, and that was obviously to link it back to her backstory. But there's like a David Cronenberg quote that I can't remember exactly how he put it, but he said that the film censor that's driven to protect is the most dangerous censor of all, because I guess there's something quite nannying about that. And again, you know, that there's like this whole like aspect to film censorship that's incredibly hypocritical. Like, I think James Furman even had the attitude, who was the BBFC head of the BBFC during this period in the 80s when this was all going on, that, you know, we can watch this stuff, but if someone living in a council estate in Manchester watches it, then we don't know what's going to happen to them. And it's like this idea that, you know, if you're educated and intellectual and middle class or whatever, then you can handle it, but that other people are stupid and it's going to make them want to go out and do something terrible. And you just think, well, what do you think our morals are based on? You know?
Yeah. Do you think as well, I mean, like you mentioned this earlier, but when you look now at social media, at, I suppose, what people call cancel culture too, I mean, has censorship ever gone away? I mean, we laugh at that period now of the early 80s, but is it still here, in your opinion?
I think it's the fear of technology that's still here that I see more so. I mean, definitely the censorship aspect, that's been really interesting. People in the States have sort of connected the film to the idea of what's been going on around Trump and censorship in the media. And we weren't thinking about that, obviously, when writing the film. But I think that there's a different thing going on now with social media that is to do with algorithms and politics, and it's got like a real political power, which I kind of drift between going, oh my God, am I being hysterical thinking that, you know, am I doing a social hysteria video nasty moment, or you know, should we be really worried about this? Because it's all stuff that we're creating these technologies and we don't know how they're going to affect us. Then I don't know. I mean, social media, I'm still on the fence about whether or not I'm hysterical or not.
Yeah, I know. I think we all are, aren't we? I noticed that Kim Newman is like sort of credited as part of this film, right? Yeah. He's an exec producer. What was sort of Kim's role in helping with this film?
Well, he's been an incredible support to me through my short films as well. He actually has if there's a little pop-up of him in Nasty, if you watch closely, he's on the newspaper being arrested by the police, which I love. So, and he was really supportive making Nasty as well. And when we started to go out to, to financiers with the project, he was just amazing and supportive and kind of putting his name to the project. And obviously he's like the godfather of the video nasty era. So to have someone like that to like lean on in terms of, you know, asking questions about that period or saying, can you read a draft of the script? And I think it just makes you feel like safer, I guess, you know, in terms of the stuff you're dealing with, because you want to be as accurate as possible, even though you're taking it, like I say, in a very imaginative, different direction. So yeah, he's just been a hugely wonderful friend and a massive support, and it's great like meeting all the fanboys when I've been out with the project, even when we were pitching, people coming over and just telling me how much they love Kim Newman, who are they're from Canada and countries and like, yeah.
He's a legend, isn't he? That's it. And I think this film is going to be a film that so many fans of that era and so many fans of the genre are going to love. I, as a like sort of horror nerd, loved sort of noticing or spotting what I thought were references to certain things. There are parts of it that reminded me a bit of Possession, Andrzej Zulawski's Possession, and it looked like there were visual nods to Lynch at times and Blue Velvet. A feel of it kind of reminded me a bit of something by Peter Strickland as well. Like it was like bringing lots of things to mind. Did you sort of draw on any particular inspirations when making this?
I think the video nasties themselves are an obvious inspiration because they're about, you know, you look at, like when I was looking at Shooting of Thunder, the film that Alice Lee appears in, I love Lucio Fulci films, and so they were kind of my go-to. I think I'm inspired by loads of different things, and I guess, you know, when I was writing the film, you're talking to different collaborators and using different references for specific ideas. So for example, with my DP, I think I was saying, let's look at like Black Swan and The Machinist, and really how do we stay in the mind of somebody who's like slowly unraveling, basically. And then, you know, for Neve, in terms of the performance, I was sending her things like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and
nice.
You know, those, and also actually the piano teacher, because she's such a hard kind of nuts character. She was great, like as a kind of reference for Enid, even though I think Enid's not quite as brittle as the piano teacher. So there were lots of different influences, and I mean, Lynch is one of my favorite directors, and I've been watching his stuff throughout my entire life. Like I started watching Twin Peaks when I was way too young to be watching it, so I feel like he's influenced me massively in just the way that I think about what film can be, because he kind of makes me think film can be art. You know, it's the way that his work is so imaginative and bonkers, and you kind of can open your imagination and your mind up to like weird twisted realities and things like that. So I definitely think he's been a huge inspiration for me in general. And it's funny because quite a few people have mentioned Barbarian Sound Studio, and I actually had the idea for Censor before Sound Studio. Like I've had the idea for a really long time, and I remember when that film came out and I was like, oh god, that sounds like like censor, like, you know, I was a bit worried because you're always, the whole way through making a film, you're always thinking, oh my God, what if something else comes out and it's about a censor, or it's, you know, and I went to see that and I loved it and thought, okay, it's great because it's not the same, but I can see why people are drawing like parallels with it. And I'm a massive Strickland fan as well. I think he's actually thanked on the credits because I connected with him in post-production, and he was really helpful in terms of some wise words of support through the process.
That's so cool. So, I mean, already the reviews seem to have been amazing, right? Like Peter Bradshaw gave it 4 stars. Jacob Stolworthy from The Independent said it was his favourite horror film in years. Mark Kermo tweeted something like, "Oh, I feel like this film was made for me," right? I mean, how have you found that? Were you going to read reviews, or were you going to just try and sort of ignore them? And how have you found it sort of generally so far?
It was funny because I was a bit nervous, obviously, in the run-up, because when you make short films, the only people that really pay them any attention are people that like them. It's not the same. I've seen my friends make their features and have all kinds of reactions, and so I was really like steeling myself for what was to come. And I told my boyfriend, I'm going to do the Q&A, and I know that the reviews will start coming out, but I'm not going to look at the internet. Can you look and tell me I should look? And I finished my Q&A, and he screenshotted and WhatsApped me from another room, like all these amazing comments on Twitter. And it was, you know, it's been really fascinating actually to read some really thoughtful pieces of writing already on the film, and how much people have really got, because when you're developing a project, you're trying to balance that, like how obvious is something, and all the layers of what you're trying to say. It feels like people have really engaged with that, and there's some people that, you know, haven't got it, and that's fine, and that's we kind of expected there to be some people that didn't completely get it, but the majority, and like you say, people like Bradshaw and Commode have like been so glowing, and it's pretty weird, I have to say. I don't think it's quite landed in my mind yet.
It's so cool. So finally then, I mean, there are so many people I know from like that really want to see this. Do you know how and when people are going to be able to see this sort of post this festival?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I can't say where it's going next yet, but we'll be able to say soon. But in terms of release and things, that's all, yes, watch this space.
Awesome. And anything sort of in the pipeline next for you, sort of project-wise, or are you just taking a little well-deserved break?
Well, I started the year going, right, I'm going to write my next film in January when I go back to work. And then I was like, okay, it's really hard to build up to the world premiere of your film and still be, because we only finished it just before Christmas, so we're still, you know, there's still things going on, finishing up, tying it up, but I've got a couple of ideas that I'm writing next, and other things like floating around, so now it's just a case of deciding which one to start with.
Amazing. I cannot wait. Prano, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Mike.
A big thank you to the brilliant Prano Bailey-Bond. Oh, what a film. I cannot wait for more of you to be able to see Censor. I feel like if you're a horror fan, if you're a fan of 80s horror, of video nasties, of that whole era, I think you're going to really, really love Censor. So we will keep everybody updated on when we hear news about distribution and release and that kind of thing. But fingers crossed you'll all get a chance to see that film this year. Now, I am about to be joined by somebody who did get to see Censor and is going to very briefly discuss the film with me, spoiler free. Later on in this discussion, we'll also be recommending 5 of our favourite female-directed horror films each. But first of all, to discuss all things Censor with me, welcome back to the podcast, long-term friend of the pod, Becky Darke. Hello.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I am all right, you know, busy and same as ever. What about you?
Same. Yeah, February. I mean, January went by in a blur, and now February started, and yeah, it's the next couple of weeks are busy, but all with exciting stuff.
Yeah.
And then it might calm down a little. And then March will also be busy with exciting stuff. So it's keeping me out of mischief, mate, you know.
Do you know what? Anything that can make lockdown go a bit faster, right? And until, you know, springtime, when I'm assuming the whole world will just suddenly turn back to normal, right?
Exactly, yeah. We'll be inundated with blossoms and cuddles. Yeah. It's going to be amazing.
So not only is it February, it's also Women in Horror Month.
Apparently so.
Do you do anything? Do you like to try and watch a few more female-directed horror films during this month or anything like that?
Yeah, I actually aim to only be a woman in horror during February. Mm-hmm. I'm not really interested the rest of the year round.
You're a complete lad the rest of the year.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Dick swinging all over the place, March to Jan, and then Feb. No, I don't actually mark it, like, particularly. I think it's a great thing, and I really, really love discovering like new films and new directors and stuff, because there's always incredible content that comes out during Feb from amazing writers, and there's always like a new link to something on Twitter that I'll be like, oh my god, what is that? That looks amazing. How have I not seen that? You know, so I love all that side of things. But no, I tend to limit my 3 horror films a day to October, and then the rest of the year I do like maybe 1.5.
Excellent. So let me ask you, I mean, I've just chatted there to Prano Bailey-Bond, who I've been so excited actually, because she's been on the podcast for quite a few times over the last few years. And I remember when she first came on the podcast during the Ghost series, and she was like, yeah, I'm like in the early stages of writing this feature film, and it's going to be about the video nasty movement and stuff. And like, it's so cool that here it is now at Sundance Film Festival. We won't give away too much, so I'm not even going to say too much about the plot of this, because I think some people would rather know as little as possible. But I think based on that interview that people will have just heard, I think, we can say, right, that this is a sort of psychological horror film set in the early 80s about a censor during the video nasties movement, essentially. And we'll leave it at that.
Perfect.
Becky's like, yes, I don't have to say any plot stuff. Amazing.
Thank God. I suddenly tear up the 3-page synopsis that I'd prepared.
She's like, great, yeah, fine. For the first time, prepared it. So, Becky, what did you think of Censor?
I loved it. I'm very happy to say that I loved it. And, I sort of know Prano very vaguely, sort of on Twitter, and obviously listening to her guesting on the podcast. And I remember that when she first sort of, planted the seed about the film that she was making. And so I've kind of had in the back of my head for a while that this was something upcoming, and that I was really excited to see it, because she's a really interesting, smart woman. And I've been really excited to hear more about it when little things have been sort of dropping on socials and stuff. And then obviously with it being at Sundance is just like so exciting. So cool. So when you said, do you want to chat about it on the podcast, I'll send you the link, despite the fact that I'm very busy. I basically bit your arm off.
I said it very tentatively, like, okay, I know you're super busy, you can say no if you want, and you were like, yeah, fine, brilliant, let's do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And yeah, happy to say it was totally worth our time. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm. I love, I think we as horror fans, right, we kind of all love anything that's got this kind of look and aesthetic, that kind of like grungy, grainy, VHS-y kind of throwback style. Did you like just the way this film looked? Yeah,
I really did. And I think having grown up in the 80s, and like the costumes and stuff were really on point. Like, that was the sort of stuff, like the female characters specifically are wearing clothes that you used to see people wearing sort of when your mum took you to Sainsbury's and all of that kind of thing. Like, they're just, like I think the production design is amazing, and it's got that kind of, because obviously it is about video nasties, and it's got that sort of graininess to it, hasn't it? I love it.
I love it as well. There's something really sort of tactile about it as well.
Yeah.
You know, all of the like whirring of the tapes and pressing all the buttons and VHSs going in and out and stuff. I love it. It reminded me a little bit, because we talked, I can't remember when it was, last year, the year before, about In Fabric. And did it not remind you a little bit? Like, it reminded me of that Peter Strickland look, you know, that sort of drab British 70s and 80s kind of thing.
Mate. Yes, obviously. I'm so glad you said that. Like, so kind of comparison wise, like it's got to be Peter Strickland. I think it's got a bit of the sort of grimy Cronenberg sort of Videodrome thing about it. It's a bit Lynchian in places. And, you know, I mean, talk about incredible sort of artists to have your film. I mean, I hope that those sorts of comparisons are the sorts of thing that Prano would want to hear. But yeah, I mean that as you say, with the whirring of the tapes and the kind of like that sound is so evocative, like the ejecting of a VHS tape, like the clunk, like the whir and the clunk of that. And, you know, I grew up having to watch stuff on VHS that you had to sort of fix the tracking on and stuff.
Yes.
And I know, we're not going to go into a lot of detail, but there is a bit in the film where Enid, the main like the protagonist, goes to a sort of small town video store, and honestly, like it's a little sleazy, but that could have been the video store like in in my little town that I grew up in. Like those like the sort of size of it, and the like even the like the way that the sort of racks are all like lined up, and then the counter in the background, and as she sort of walks up like the facade of the building and stuff, I was just like, oh my god. Like I was at that age, you know, renting things like The Jungle Book, but so not quite so sort of under the counter. It was a bit more mainstream.
Of Disney sing-alongs.
Heard you've got the uncut Disney Robin Hood.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Yeah, I loved it. It was so evocative of all of that kind of thing. I loved it. It felt like there was so much attention in the production design and all of that kind of thing. But also at the centre of it, and again, we won't spoil too much about what happens here, but this is the story of this woman, right? This Censor, played by Neve Algar, who I think was excellent. And she... I found like a really compelling character, and it's something that Prano mentioned about, you know, wanting to have a character that is a censor. So is essentially the sort of figure that a lot of horror fans sort of rallied against, right? Somebody who was the one sort of cutting films or pulling films or rejecting films, often for no good reason, you know, is the sort of reputation, right, that era has.
Yeah.
But it felt like quite a good, interesting sort of three-dimensional view of this character. What did you think of her as a character and that sort of journey she goes on?
I thought it was really, really interesting in terms of the way that the character's put together, because when you first meet her, she's very kind of earnest and you know, takes her job very seriously, and I think at first there is maybe that kind of stereotypical aspect about what
Mary
you would
Whitehouse
expect.
kind of.
Yeah. But saying that, and because, you know, Prano really cleverly uses a lot of sort of news footage and stuff of the time about, you know, reports about video nasties, and she really like the use of sort of contemporary media from the time period about the kind of moral social panic about these things is slotted into the film like so beautifully. Like I think that sort of stuff could be used to sort of hit you over the head a little bit too much, but it doesn't at all. It's very natural. And you do get a little bit of Mary Whitehouse, but you know, the thing about that is at the time, or maybe straight after, she was admitting that like she was making decisions or campaigning about stuff that she'd never seen. Whereas with the censors, it's almost the exact opposite of that, because they are literally spending like all of their working hours kind of poring over the details of these films that they're then having to make decisions on. And I think that Enid's character is so interesting because she takes it so seriously. She is earnest, but she just wants to do a good job. And I think that is a really interesting way to approach it.
It's so true. And there is a certain element of actual danger and harm, I think, right? Because this was an era that was like VHS was a new medium, and it meant that there was no regulations and people could make any old shit they wanted in the woods and put it out on VHS and sell it in like little corner shops, right? And so there was stuff that was genuinely probably dangerous and harmful. I mean, even some of the legit ones like Cannibal Holocaust, famous for all of its animal cruelty and everything, right? So I can imagine that actually, like you say, you're so right, you know, it's different maybe for people like Mary Whitehouse, but for those people actually, and there was only about 7 or 8 of them working in that sort of censor board and actually having to watch everything that came through their desk every day, all day. Like, you would be a bit disturbed at the end of a working day, I think, wouldn't you? That's the thing, because you have no idea what you're watching and how legit it's going to be, I think. Yeah,
and also, you know, I think a lot of it, they're watching it at its most extreme. You know, we know from what we've heard from filmmakers who were making horror films at that sort of time, and even, you know, I know that the ratings board has got a slightly different sort of setup in terms of its leadership and its like priorities now, but filmmakers submit okay, so like Human Centipede 2, which you were talking about on the main podcast, you know, they are submitting that to deliberately like push buttons, push boundaries, and sort of think, okay, fine, you think it's bad, well, wait till you see what I've got next. So the censors who have this job to watch this stuff, you know, almost frame by frame and watch it repeatedly and make these decisions, they're seeing a lot of stuff in its rawest form.
Completely raw.
Yeah, much more so than what we then get after, you know, any suggested cuts may have been made or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a really excellent kind of device to then explore, you know, the different sides of censorship and what kind of challenging material can potentially do to people's psyches, because, you know, in terms of the sorts of films that we all enjoy, we would very often be like, oh, no, like, show it to me, you know, I want to see it, push my buttons, but at the same time you kind of don't know what decisions have been made to get it to that place that it's kind of okay to consume and it's not gonna be too much. Like, I don't know, you're right, it's a fine line.
I think that's it. I think, like, we know basically that what we're going to watch now has been through a filter system, so that whatever you watch, no matter how hardcore it is, it's going to be essentially sort of safe, right? It's going to be kind of legit. Whereas, these people, like you say, they're the first port of call in that filter system. They're the ones that have to see it raw. I actually said to Prano, it was really interesting, I sort of said, do you in any way agree with sort of censorship, you know? And she said she didn't think she did, but then she was like, I watched a Serbian film, and she was like, for me, that was too much. Like, I felt like, she said she felt that kind of outrage, like, this film should not be shown to people, which is really interesting. And, you know, people all have their different lines that they draw and different sort of levels of what they do and don't want to see. Do you personally, Becky, like, are you sort of pro-censorship in any form when it comes to sort of art?
My knee-jerk answer is no. I mean, you know, I think that art is there as a sort of very important comment on and mirror to the world that we live in. And I think that censorship, I think that it's one of those things that if you give it an inch, it has the potential to take a mile. So I would always err on the don't censor things, because at least then people can self-censor, or parents can censor for their children, or, you know, if something criminal happens, then that is like a kind of different arm of, you know, society that kind of deals with that. But in terms of just artistic censorship, I personally feel that the responsibility should really lie in the hands of the audience. And, you know, I make decisions on the sorts of things that I will expose myself to, I guess. And funnily enough, like over the last year, I've been pushing my own boundaries a little bit more. And I know, like I used to be like, obviously I've always been into horror, but I never liked, I don't know, there was all this stuff that I was like, oh no, I couldn't possibly. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, fucking show it to me. You know, I think there's something about lockdown that's pushed me over an edge, Mike, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, tell me about it. Yeah.
But, you know, I think, I mean, I just think that you can make your own decisions about, you know, what triggers you or what you personally find distasteful. I think it's important not to try and make those decisions for other people.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And that's somebody who's like, I've spent lockdown like one of those censors, like sat in a dark room by myself watching horrible stuff over the last couple of months. But I agree, like ultimately, I don't think that any of those things I watched and put myself through should have actually been banned or cut, really. Because most of them are just, you know, films. I
think the film is, you know, it's quite clear it's not. So I didn't come away from it feeling that it had a particular agenda about censorship one way or the other. I think it was just telling a story, like an interesting story about what happens behind the doors of, you know, the censorship, kind of the process. And I didn't sort of come away thinking any differently about censorship. It was more just, this almost realization of like, God, these poor buggers who have to sit through like the absolute worst of the worst and are making really difficult decisions. Like, it must be such a thankless task. And I think this comes across in the film, this idea that you're never going to get it right for everybody. You're either going to make decisions to cut things, at which point the filmmakers and the producers and some of the audience are going to be pissed off with you, or you're going to be too lax and let something through, and then the press and other members of the film watching audience and, you know, potentially sort of families are going to then be pissed off at you for that. So it's like, you can't win. And I think that comes across really well. Really well.
Yeah, that's it. It's a really kind of nuanced, sort of balanced view of that whole issue, I think. And another thing that I think the film, and I'm not going to give away too much, but I think the film dabbles with is this idea of our own human instinct to sort of repress or censor, whether it's our own memories, our own traumas, whether it's, and you know, Prano mentioned this idea of, even in this day and age, social media, cancel culture. Like, are we still essentially all trying to censor each other and ourselves as well, right? I mean, like, that weird, there is a part of us that wants to do that, kind of repress or hide what we don't like about the world, I suppose,
and pass judgment as well, like, because it's not always just about judging what the content is. Like, sometimes there's kind of judgment passed about the people who consume it. I find that really interesting, you know, that I think horror is a good example, sort of heavy metal music and stuff like that. This idea that if you listen, I mean, we've talked about this so many times, like, if you watch horror films and you listen to like heavy metal, then you're an inherently like fucked up, like a weirdo, an evil person. And actually you talk to us and we're like the nicest, friendliest kind of
exactly
most inclusive kind of cuddly people. And I think there's an argument to say that it's those who maybe kind of default to the repression side of things who are the ones that society should be worried about, not those of us who can sort of engage with it in a healthy way.
My final question for you about this film is, how good is Michael Smiley in this film?
Oh my God! So the cast is great. You know, Neve Algar.
Yeah.
So I know her from a film from I think last year called Calm with Horses, which is on Netflix now. And honestly, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's so fucking good. And that absolutely came out of left field for me. You know, it was the sort of film that I sort of looked at and thought, oh my God, this looks a bit misery porn. But actually it was just the most engaging, amazing film. And she is electric in it. So when I heard that she was going to be playing the lead in Censor, I was so excited. And I think she smashes it, actually. Yeah. And then, Michael Smiley is just, he's the absolute quintessential, like, sleazy producer kind of casting couch.
Yeah. He just looks like he's having the most fun time playing that role as well. Yeah. Absolutely chewing the scenery. It's really good. So, I mean, sadly, at this point in time, we don't know when Censor is going to be released or how people are going to see it. But I take it you would recommend it to people when it's out there. Oh,
yeah, I really, really would. You know, I think it's... the reviews and stuff coming out of Sundance, if that doesn't convince you, then, you know, you can sort of take it from us as people who sort of have had a bit of interaction with Prano and just know, like, you know, that it's come from this... I don't know, this sort of little indie place, and I feel like it's like she's just made such a triumph of it, and it feels like it's almost sort of greater than the sum of its parts. Like it's such a good film, and as a first feature, it's just absolutely remarkable. So I really, really hope it gets decent distribution so people can see it soon.
It's so good. It's one of those films that I think it will be there alongside movies like St. Maud, like Barbarian Sound Studio, like these kind of really interesting sort of horror art housey kind of indie project.
That's right? Exactly where it belongs.
Yeah, so good. Good for Prano. And actually, to the listeners out there, I don't think I've ever seen Becky Darke so happy in my life as when we went to a night organised by Prano. Prano put on a screening at like one of the poshest old cinemas in London, the Regent Street Cinema. Very kind of like grand, isn't it? And beautiful.
Very,
and old.
And there was like a drinks reception.
Yeah, drinks reception. They show a lot of kind of silent films and art house films and foreign films there. Anyway, we went to a night there hosted by Prano, and she screened Basket Case. And I mean, your face was a thing to behold, Becky, throughout that whole film. I've never seen you so happy.
It was just... It was such an emotional roller coaster. Like watching that fucking film, like there was something evocative about the setup. Like it all felt sort of very exciting and like a little bit sort of edgy to be in this very sort of grand place, like watching this scuzzy little like exploitation film with you and like our friends Steve and Tom and Annika were there, and you know, we'd had a couple of bevs before and all of that, and I was basically just sat kind of like forward for the whole, it's not a long film.
Forward,
just leaning forward, like absolutely wide-eyed, transfixed, laughing. Like I laughed so hard at one point, I thought I was going to fall off of my chair, then shed like actual human tears at the ending of the film. It was a roller coaster. God, I love that fucking film.
So as a little aside, we would also recommend Basket Case, which is another one of Prano's favourites and one of those early 80s kind of films as well. So it's what a treat that film is. What a treat.
What a treat.
Okay, we're just going to finish now. I know both me and you, Becky, are incredibly busy right now. We don't have a whole lot of time. We've got about 15 minutes, and I want to try and rattle through a few female-directed horror film recommendations. So I asked you, of course, very last minute, to just put together a list of 5 of your favourites. I've got a list of my 5, so we're going to rattle through 10 of our faves, shall we?
Let's rattle.
So let's alternate. Becky, let's begin with yours. What's your first pick?
Anyone who knows me is not going to be surprised by my first choice being 1982's The Slumber Party Massacre, directed by Amy Holden Jones.
One thing's for sure, no one's getting any sleep the night of The Slumber Party Massacre. Close your eyes for a second and sleep forever.
I love this film so much. It's one of those films that I think before I sort of reached my point where 80s slashers were a bit of a like they became more sort of common and like commonplace for me, and I was doing them much more regularly, a bit like with you and Stevie and stuff. This was one of those ones that I would have been like, oh, it sounds shit, and then you watch it and it's just got everything. It's got everything. What a joy. It is the just the absolute perfect 80s slasher. And it also includes my favourite ever food moment in cinema, which I won't spoil, but it involves pizza. And then I've done my classic and snuck in a 6th of my 5, because it's just worth also saying that Slumber Party Massacre 2 from 1987 is also amazing, and also
I've never seen the sequel.
Also directed by a woman, Deborah Brock. The sequel is. So there are 3 in total. I've only seen the first 2 because the third one's really difficult to get hold of. But Slumber Party Massacre 2 has got some brilliant kind of like 80s girl band action. They're sort of, girls wearing a lot of pastel with guitars, playing music at parties. And a guy, like the murder weapon is like a giant drill that comes out of the neck of a kind of satanic guitar. Like, honestly, what's not to love?
I love it. I feel like at some point that should be a double bill that me, you and Stevie cover,
yes,
right?
Please.
I mean,
yes,
we need
please.
to, don't we?
We'll just find out the anniversary of the massacre and then we can
exactly
hook it onto that.
When lockdown finishes, we'll have an actual slumber party, the 3 of us, and record it live.
Oh, the dream.
In pyjamas.
Yes, please.
Let me just look up I'm going to get Just Watch up. Okay, so Slumber Party Massacre, you can stream that right now on Amazon Prime in the UK.
Oh, you can?
As well.
Yeah. Yes, you can.
Check that out. Okay, so the first one on my list is I'm going for an 80s / I think it's late 80s classic, directed by Mary Lambert. It's Pet Sematary.
Paramount Pictures presents Stephen King's all-time best-selling tale of horror, Pet Sematary.
I mean, I'm sure everyone out there who's listening to this has probably seen Pet Sematary, but it's one of those films that is like, when I sort of think about it with my sort of critical head, there's quite a lot that you could pick apart about it. There's quite a lot that's maybe wrong with it. Like, some of the acting is pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Some of the story's a bit all over the place, but Mary Lambert, I think, still does such a good job at creating something really, truly scary and nightmarish at the same time. Like, it doesn't quite make sense, and it's all a bit weird and disjointed and awkward. But yeah, it's filled with images that have haunted me my whole life.
Yeah.
I loved it. I thought it was... And even though the remake of Pet Sematary was in some ways much more kind of conventionally well-made and glossier and more kind of... It was actually much more boring than the original and no
drier than a cream cracker, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Drier than a cream cracker. I couldn't have put it better myself. Exactly. There's something kind of so interestingly weird about the original. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I love it. I so deeply love it. Despite the flaws, it's such an amazing film. And I mean, from everything from terrifying Zelda to like little Gage in his creepy little outfit, and like how sad he is at the like. It's just
the little shoe that flies into the road.
And fucking hell, that entire sequence. God. I mean, it's just a classic for a reason, isn't it?
It's so good, and the cat as well. Oh, it's so good. So yeah, that's Pet Sematary from 1989. You can stream that on Now TV if you've got it. Now TV or Sky Movies have got it for free. Okay, Becky, what's next on your list?
Okay, so I'm going a bit more recent. My second one is 2014's A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, directed by Anna Lily Amirpour.
دختر
در تاریکی کن دقت منو نمیدونی
Such a good film.
What a good film. It's so stylish, and it's got like a real sort of atmosphere about it, a real sort of slow but satisfying pace. I think there's parts in the film where like she really builds this kind of this world where you're not like it's a bit disorienting, like you're not entirely sure kind of what you're watching for parts of it. There's incredible use of music, like really then like amazing sort of like club scenes and incredible camera use where it will just be like a static shot of a bedroom for ages where you're just like watching. So it's Sheila Vand is the actress, and she's just been in if you watch The Rental. Yeah, she's great in The Rental.
She's the best person in The Rental, definitely. Yeah, loved it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Apart from the dog.
Of course.
Sorry, that goes without saying. I don't even know why I brought it up. Yeah, so I just think like it's a very singular film. A girl walks home alone at night. It's like vampires, but kind of moody, like, well, most vampires are moody, but you know what I mean? Like,
oh, totally. It's so different, isn't it? I think, just when you think you've seen every type of vampire film imaginable,
exactly.
It's like, oh, here's a completely new thing again. Yeah, I loved it as well. So
yeah,
that's A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night from 2014. And that is, you can't stream that for free anywhere at the moment, but you can rent it or you can pick it up on Blu-ray as well. It's definitely worth a watch. Okay, my next choice is going to be Alice Lowe's Prevenge.
At the end of the day, you've got this force of nature now inside you. Baby knows what to do. Baby will tell you what to do. It's just nature's way.
I think nature's a bit of an arse, though, don't you?
Oh.
It's so good, isn't it? It's like already a bit of a modern classic in just how much fun it is. Alice Lowe, who literally 8 months pregnant, wrote and shot and starred in and directed this film in the space of about 2 weeks. Designed it purely so that she could film it in a nice, easy way. She wanted to set up a story that was like a very linear. A woman kills her way through a bunch of people one by one. It means that you don't have to have any cast members that are in more than like 2 scenes apart from her. She can like plow through it. And she is that sort of really interesting case of like somebody who made a film based on like her own kind of situation and made the best of it, I suppose. It's like she was thinking, when I have kids, when am I next going to be able to do this? So she just did it. And not only did she manage to do all that, which is a feat in itself, but the film is just incredible, right?
Yeah.
It's a genuinely good, creepy but really funny, really gory revenge movie, sort of slasher movie type format. I loved it as well. Are you a fan?
I am a fan. It's along similar lines to a lot of those films that actually have Alice Lowe involved in. So, things like Sightseers, it's got a similar sense of humour to that, dark sense of humour, and like a real sort of sense of like pathos that kind of runs like, because it's actually like, the reason that she's killing is a very sad reason, but then you kind of have that juxtaposed with the fact that she's got like this voice in her head, or rather, is it in her womb? Because it's basically like the baby, like telling her to kill these people and kind of egging her on. I have a bit of a phobia of pregnancy and pregnant women, genuine. And so this has an extra little layer of kind of fear and sort of squirminess for me. And I actually put off watching it for so long for literally that reason. And then I got to the point where I'd heard so many people say so many amazing things about it. I was like, oh, fucking come on, Becky, like pull yourself together. And I'm very glad I did, because it's amazing.
It's really fun, isn't it? Yeah. So that's Prevenge from 2017. You can stream that on Shudder and Prime and BFI Player. It's available everywhere, basically. So you've got no excuse to check that out. All right. What's your next pick?
Mine sounds like your last one, because it's Revenge from 2017.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God, this is what a film.
Right, now you're going to have to help me out here, mate, because not being a French speaker, it's directed by Coralie.
Now, I've met her and I've even forgotten. Farget, I think. Or something. I'm not exactly sure.
Because I thought it may be like Farget or something like that.
Yeah,
but I don't think it is. Okay, I'm going to call her Coralie as if we're best mates, because I don't want to butcher her surname. But Revenge is it's almost like beyond description for me. It is incredible. It's a rape revenge film, and it's so beautifully directed because I think you get a genuine sense of the horror and the brutality of the sexual assault, but it's such an effective story of vengeance and such a kind of turnaround from the female character that you are introduced to at the beginning. I think it's Jen at the beginning of the film, to where she is and what she is and kind of what she is capable of by the end of the film. There is one scene in a cave that will stay with me for just like the rest of my life, like her kind of transformation. And yeah, I mean, I just love it. Like it is stunning.
It looks incredible. It's really disturbing, but it's also kind of cathartic and kind of exciting at the same time. I completely agree with you. It's considering what the story is, it's crazy fun. It's just really fun, really cathartic, really enjoyable. So there you go. That is Revenge, and you can stream that for free right now in the UK on Shudder. So check that out on Shudder. Okay, I'm gonna go for something along very similar lines narratively, because my next choice is also a rape revenge film, but tonally also couldn't be more different. This is Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale.
I wish I were on yonder hill.
We don't want no trouble.
That's just the way, isn't it? You don't want trouble, but sometimes trouble wants you.
They close. What are you doing?
So this is from director Jennifer Kent, right, who made The Babadook, which was it was a brilliant, beautiful film, but it was quite mainstream, it was quite accessible, it was a kind of monster film, a ghost story. This is totally different. It's a sort of Australian Western period piece set in 1825 about this woman called Claire, an Irish convict, and something atrocious happening to her at the beginning of the film, and then kind of what happens on this incredible journey throughout the rest of the movie. Becky, have you seen this film?
I haven't actually seen it. I haven't quite... Yeah, that face is why I haven't watched it yet, because I've heard how harrowing it is and I haven't quite psyched myself up.
It's hard. It's hard going. I watched this... at London Film Festival, I think. I was sat next to Rosie Fletcher, and we were both like there were posters up on the walls of the cinema that sort of said like trigger warnings, and somebody came up and gave a trigger warning before it started. It was like, oh my god. And it is absolutely harrowing and it's absolutely traumatic, but then, like with a lot of sort of rape revenge films, it then goes on such an amazing journey. And it's handled really well and handled really sensitively, and it's got really stunning performances, and it's shot by Jennifer Kent, who has this amazing kind of bold imagery. Like, it in some ways is nothing like The Babadook, but in other ways there are sort of dream sequences that reminded me of The Babadook and stuff, and it looks stunning. So that's all I'll say about it. But yeah, that's The Nightingale. There's actually just released, I think this week or last week, a beautiful Second Sight edition. There's a Blu-ray release of it, which you can now pick up, or if you want to just stream it, if you want to give it a watch, it is available on Netflix, so you can stream that and watch it right now. Becky, I'm really sorry, we've got 2 choices each left, but I'm pretty much out of time. I've got about 3 minutes left, so we're gonna have to just quickly rattle through our last 4 choices, if that's all right. What is your next pick?
So my next one is 2000's American Psycho, directed by Mary Harron. I mean, I don't even need to say too much about it, do I? Like, it's
Phil Collins
just,
and murder. Yeah.
Honestly, talk about, amazing stuff set in the 80s. This is it. And if you want a naked man running around chasing you with a fucking chainsaw and then needing to return some videotapes, this is for you.
It's so good. It's so much fun. Brad and I chatted about this in our Serial Killers episode if you want to hear a bit more chat on that film. But that's American Psycho from 2000, and you can stream that on Shudder. Okay, Becky, what's your final choice?
So my final one is super current. We saw it at actually last year's Virtual Fright Fest. It's 12-Hour Shift from Brie Grant. I fucking loved this film. It is an absolute, it's just a chaotic clusterfuck, and I just loved every moment.
Yeah, loved it so much. Really fun, really quirky, really weird.
Super fun. David Arquette's in it. He always brings a certain chaotic energy. It's about like organ trafficking, and it's all set in like a hospital, and it's so good.
It's so good, so much fun. Yeah, if you want a good laugh compared to some of those other, really dark rape revenge movies, this one is so much fun. That's 12-Hour Shift from 2020, and you can't stream it for free anyway. You can rent it online in all the usual places, or you can pick up a Blu-ray or DVD of it wherever you get those. All right, I will very quickly rattle through my two choices because these are two films that I am either going to talk about this series or I have already spoken about. My first one is Karen Kusama's The Invitation. I mean, this is just one of my absolute favourite films. A couple drive to a dinner party in the middle of sort of Hollywood, and the party is hosted by our main character's ex-wife and her new husband, and they're acting very strangely. Some of their guests are very strange, and it is this kind of like dark pot boiler thriller. It's psychological, it's a slow burn, it's filled with dread, it's genuinely terrifying.
Yeah, and the ending.
Oh my God. That's the thing. It really delivers as well by the end. It doesn't let you down. So there you go. That's The Invitation, directed by Karen Kusama from 2016. And you can stream that right now for free on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, get involved. Do it immediately. And my final choice, which is a really tough film to watch, but really good, is Claire Denis' Trouble Every Day, which I've already talked about at length on the podcast, so I won't say anymore, but I'm like, well, cannibals, women who have sex with men and then eat them when they're sexually aroused. That's all I'll say, but it's worth a watch, It's great.
So my recent extreme cinema foray hasn't led me up to Trouble Every Day yet, but I do really like Claire Denis, and I do love a bit of cannibalism. So it's high on my watch list. I'll get there soon. Yeah,
double bill it with Raw. You can't go wrong.
Oh, perfect.
It's a bit of a trickier one to track down, annoyingly, Trouble Every Day, but I rented it for £3.50 on Mubi. So if you sign up to Mubi, you can then rent it for £3.50. So that's Trouble Every Day. So there you go. Becky, thank you so much. Just remind us where people can find you and more of your stuff out there online.
Yeah, I am at Bunny Dark on Twitter and Instagram, at Becky Darke on Letterboxd, and loads of exciting stuff coming up, so you can find it all there.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
And that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening to this little bonus episode, and a huge thank you to my two brilliant guests, Becky Darke and Prano Bailey-Bond. So as we had to sort of rush towards the end there, I'm going to quickly list and recap all 10 of our female-directed horror films that Becky and I recommended one more time. So, Becky recommended Slumber Party Massacre from 1982, American Psycho from 2000, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night from 2014, Revenge from 2017, and 12-Hour Shift from 2020. I recommended as my 5 picks Pet Sematary from 1989, Trouble Every Day from 2001, The Invitation from 2016, Prevenge from 2017, and The Nightingale from 2018. And if you want more Becky Darke, where that came from, then over on Patreon this week we will be bringing you a Valentine's special. Yes, I will be joined by my dream warriors Becky Darke and Stevie Webb, and we'll be discussing 2 films that are both having key anniversaries this year. My Bloody Valentine, which was released 40 years ago this week, February 1981, and Valentine, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary from 2001. So there you go. You can find those discussions over on Patreon later on this week. And And normal business will resume with our Mind and Body series on Friday. We'll be bringing you part 31, in which I'm joined by none other than the Final Girls host, Anna Bulgatskaya, to discuss Gaspar Noé's climax. That is also a discussion you are not going to want to miss. Join us again very soon for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.